I still remember the look in my granddaughter's eyes when she asked, "Grandma, were you ever scared when you were a little girl?" I smiled gently and brushed a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear. She'll never know, at least not yet, that fear once ruled my every breath, that I used to sleep with my shoes on, ready to run, that my own mother sold me like property to pay off her poker debts. My name is Sandra Ward. I'm 74 years old, and I live in a quiet cottage just outside Fremont, Nebraska. The winters here bite hard, but I've always liked the sound of snow tapping the window pane. Peaceful, predictable. Everything my childhood wasn't. When I was young, I thought home meant safety, that it meant warm cornbread on the stove, the sound of someone humming in the next room. But for me, home was a gamble, literally, and I was the stake. My mother, Lorraine Ward, was a firecracker of a woman, beautiful, reckless, and dangerously charming. Men loved her laugh. Women warned their sons about it. She had a way of walking into a room and making everyone feel like they owed her something, and somehow she always left with what she wanted, except money. She never seemed to have enough of that. I was born in 1951, a hot July evening, when a thunderstorm rattled the windows of the county hospital. My daddy left before I could speak his name. All I had was Mama, and for a long time, I thought that was enough. We lived in a weathered clapboard house 2 blocks from the train tracks. The paint was peeling, and the yard was more dirt than grass, but I never noticed. Back then, a child's world is only as small or as wide as her mother makes it, and my world was tied to Lorraine's moods. When Mama was sober, she was all laughter and lipstick. She'd sit me on her lap, press her cheek against mine, and whisper that I was the prettiest little thing Fremont had ever seen. But when she drank her worse, when she lost at cards, her eyes would go cold. The kind of cold that made your skin sting before the slap ever came. By the time I was 9, I had memorized every creak in the hallway floor, every excuse to stay quiet, every way to become invisible. I wasn't stupid, I knew something was wrong, but I also knew better than to speak on it, especially when the house smelled like gin and ash, and the front door slammed harder than it should. I started doing small chores at Mrs. Thompson's bakery after school, sweeping floors, boxing pastries. She paid me in leftover rolls and smiles, and for a while, I believed I could work hard enough to escape the mess Mama kept dragging us into. But debt has a way of closing in like floodwater, silent, relentless. One night, when I was 12, I overheard a man at the front door. I was in bed, pretending to sleep, but I could make out enough through the cracked wallboard. His voice was gravelly and impatient. "You said next Friday. Lorraine, now it's been 3. Mama's voice didn't sound like hers. It was soft, tight. "I need a little more time. Victor, I just need," he cut her off. "Or maybe you give me something else. Something that ain't money, but valuable." That was the first time I heard his name, Victor Harlan. I wouldn't forget it. His name would come back to haunt me like the sharp clink of ice in a glass. I didn't understand all the words they said that night, but I understood the silence afterward, the silence that came when a deal had been struck, the kind of silence that suffocates. I wish I could say that was the night everything changed, but it wasn't. Not yet. That was just the beginning, the fuse being lit. Now, all these years later, when I run my fingers over the age spots on my hands, I remember the girl I used to be. I remember how desperately she wanted to believe that her mother still loved her, that maybe Mama just didn't know what she was doing, but Lorraine knew. And as I sit here, looking out at my peaceful Nebraska yard, I realize that telling this story isn't about revenge. It's about finally speaking the truth for that little girl who had no voice. My name is Sandra Ward. I was born in a storm, raised in silence, and sold before I had a chance to grow. But I'm still here, and this is my story. When I think back to my earliest memories, they don't smell like cookies or feel like bedtime hugs. They smell like cigarette smoke and stale beer, and they sound like cards slapping on a table. Growing up with Lorraine Ward as a mother was like growing up in a casino. No clocks, no rules, and no guarantee you'd come out whole. She was obsessed with gambling long before I understood what it even meant. Some people fall into addiction gradually. With my mother, it was a wildfire. She started small nickel poker with neighbors on Friday nights. At first, it was just loud laughter echoing through the walls and the occasional curse when someone lost a hand. But it didn't take long before those games weren't just for fun anymore. Lorraine needed to win, needed it like a breath. By the time I was 6, Mama had started leaving me home alone for hours so she could play at the underground card rooms just outside of town. The kind where heavy smoke hung in the air and nobody asked questions if a woman cried in the alley afterward. I remember sitting on the porch, clutching my knees to my chest, watching the sun go down and wondering if she'd be back before morning. Sometimes she was, sometimes she wasn't. When she returned, she'd either be giddy twirling me in the kitchen, promising to buy me a new dress I never got, or she'd be dangerous, cold, quiet. And on those nights, I learned to sleep with one eye open. She never hit me hard when I was little. Not yet. Back then, her punishments came in words sharp, biting things that made me question whether I was loved at all. "You ruined my life," she said once when I spilled a cup of milk. I was 5. I still remember how her voice cracked like glass. School was my only refuge. My teacher said I was smart. A quiet girl, always early, always with her homework done. They didn't know I finished my spelling words by flashlight, hiding under the covers while Mama shouted in the other room. I started picking up on things early, like how she always wore her red lipstick when she needed to borrow money, how her hands trembled just before she made a bet, and how her mood could flip in an instant sunshine 1 second, a thunderstorm the next. She used to tell me that I was lucky. "You're pretty, Sandy," she'd say, lighting another cigarette with a trembling hand. "One day, that face will get you out of this dump." I didn't know then how literal she meant it. When I turned 8, I started tagging along to the bar rooms and backstreet games. She'd dress me up in frilly dresses and make me sit quietly in the corner with a coloring book while she played for hours. I remember the men leering, the smell of liquor thick in the air, and how Mama would shoot me a warning glance if I dared to speak. She never called it neglect. She called it survival. "There's no man coming to save us," she told me once, dragging on a cigarette, staring at nothing. "You either play the game or get eaten alive." But I was just a child. I didn't want to play any games. I wanted bedtime stories, a hot meal, a hug that didn't come with strings attached. By the time I was 9, Lorraine had stopped pretending. She pawned anything of value we owned: her wedding ring, my baby blanket, even the radio my grandfather left us before he passed. She sold things not just to pay off debts, but to place bigger, riskier bets. She believed her big win was always just around the corner, but the truth was, her losses were mounting, and when she couldn't pay with money, she started looking for other ways. That's when the men started showing up more often. Strange men. Men who didn't look me in the eyes. Men who made me feel like I wasn't even there. I didn't understand it at first. I was still too young. But I knew something was wrong. Mama started locking her bedroom door at night. She'd whisper on the phone when she thought I was asleep, and sometimes I'd wake up to find her crying in the kitchen, her hands shaking too hard to light her cigarette. I remember one night, I found her passed out on the floor with a handful of poker chips still clenched in her fist. I covered her with a blanket and sat beside her all night, too scared to sleep. At school, I stopped raising my hand. I stopped speaking up. Kids whispered that I smelled like smoke and never brought a lunch. Teachers looked at me with that worried tilt of the head, but nobody ever asked the right questions. I didn't know what CPS was back then, and even if I had, I wouldn't have known how to ask for help, because even through everything, I still loved her. She was my mother, and part of me kept hoping she'd stop, that maybe one day she'd tuck me in at night and sing the lullaby she used to hum when I was little, that she'd quit the cards, get a real job, and we'd finally have a normal life. But hope, I learned, can be dangerous when it's built on someone else's addiction. By the time I turned 10, Lorraine owed thousands to men she couldn't afford to cross, and that's when she made the decision that would shatter what little innocence I had left. She didn't need money. She had me. It was a Wednesday in late October. The Nebraska wind had turned cruel, and the leaves danced wildly outside our broken windows. I had just turned 11 a few months earlier, but I already felt decades older. Mama had been quiet all day, too quiet. That kind of stillness that always came before something terrible. She wasn't drinking, not yelling, not even smoking. She just kept pacing in the kitchen, muttering to herself and staring at the clock like it was counting down to doomsday. I sat at the wobbly kitchen table, peeling the label off an empty soup can, afraid to ask questions. I knew the signs, knew when to stay small, silent, out of her way. But that day felt different. Her energy wasn't rage. It was fear, desperation. Just after 6:00 p.m., a car pulled up in front of the house. I peeked through the curtain and saw him, a man in a dark overcoat, his face half covered by the shadow of his hat. He didn't get out of the car right away. He just sat there, engine humming, like a wolf waiting in the brush. Mama straightened her dress and ran her fingers through her hair. She dabbed on lipstick red, the shade she only wore when she needed something big. Then she turned to me, her eyes unreadable. "Sandy, go wash your face." And put on that green dress. The green dress. It still had the tag on it. She'd found it at a thrift store and saved it for a special occasion. I thought maybe she'd meant church or a school recital. I was wrong. I opened my mouth to ask why, but she shot me a look that told me not to push. I obeyed. In the mirror, I saw a girl I barely recognized, pale skin, hollow eyes, lips chapped from the cold. I ran a brush through my hair with shaking hands and pulled on the dress. It hung loosely over my small frame. When I came back, Mama was lighting candles in the living room, not for ambiance, to hide the smell of mildew and cigarettes. I realized later. She glanced at me. "Good," she said. "You look nice." There was no warmth in her voice, just calculation. The knock came at exactly 6:30. She opened the door, and in stepped Victor Harlan, the same man I'd overheard a few weeks earlier. He looked even older up close, gray at the temples, thick hands, eyes like burnt coal. He gave Mama a stiff nod, then looked straight at me. I'll never forget that look. It was the kind men give livestock at auction. I felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Victor sat on the couch. Mama poured him a drink. They made small talk, mostly about money, some poker games she'd lost, and how tight things had gotten. I stood frozen near the hallway, watching them from a distance, unsure if I was allowed to leave, or if that would make things worse. Finally, he set down his glass and said, "We should get to it." Mama turned to me. "Go with Mr. Harlan, Sandy," she said, like she was telling me to go fetch groceries. I looked at her. "Go where?" "To his place, just for a little while." I shook my head. "No, I don't want to." Her eyes flared. "Don't start." Victor stood. "It's okay. I'll be gentle." The way he said it made my stomach turn. My body went cold. I backed up, bumping into the wall behind me. "Mama, please don't make me," she snapped. "You think this is about what you want. You owe me. You've eaten my food, slept under my roof. I've had to scrape and crawl to keep this house. Now do your part." She came over and grabbed my wrist hard. "Do what I say, or I swear to God, you'll wish you had." I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes weren't just angry. They were hollow, like the woman I'd loved was already gone. And then she handed me over. Victor placed a coat around my shoulders, like I was some delicate thing, and led me out the door while Mama stayed behind, pouring herself another drink. I don't remember the car ride clearly, just the smell leather seats, stale cologne, something bitter beneath it. I kept my eyes on the window, counting telephone poles, trying to memorize turns in case I could run. He took me to a small, nondescript house just outside town. No neighbors nearby, no street lights, just him and me in that cold, ugly place. He offered me food. I refused. He told me to sit. I didn't move. Then his voice changed. No more polite smiles, no more pretense. "You're here because a debt needs settling. Be smart about it." He took off his coat, then his belt. I froze. My feet wouldn't move. My voice wouldn't come. The first time he touched me, I felt like I left my body, like I was watching it happen to someone else. A girl in a green dress, limp and silent, lying on a bed that smelled like old sweat and bleach. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. So I survived. Afterward, he cleaned up, tossed me a damp towel, and drove me back home, just like that, as if nothing had happened. Mama didn't even ask if I was okay. She just took the wad of cash from his hand and nodded toward the bathroom. "Wash up." I did. And then I went to my room, curled up in bed, and cried into my pillow until my ribs ached. That night, I stopped being a child. That night, I learned that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it lives right across the hallway and wears your mother's perfume. After that first night, everything changed, but nothing on the surface looked different. Mama still smoked by the window in the mornings, staring out at the street like the answers to her misery might show up in a neighbor's mailbox. She still played her records loud on weekends, danced around the kitchen in her robe when she was tipsy. She still told me to clean the bathroom, to sweep the porch, to iron her dresses, but she never looked me in the eye again, and I never asked her why, because I already knew. That night with Victor Harlan hadn't been a one-time mistake. It had been a transaction, and I was the payment. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be it. Maybe. That he'd gotten what he wanted, and Mama had settled her debt. But a week later, another man came to the door, a man I didn't recognize, a man who smiled too wide and asked for me by name. Mama I called from the hallway. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was low and tense. "Put on the blue dress." And just like that, it began again. Over the next 2 years, I was passed around like a borrowed object loaned out, bought, returned, then sold again. Men would come to the house or pick me up in cars with out-of-state plates. Sometimes Mama sent me to cheap motels with dirty carpets and cigarette burns on the sheets. Sometimes they came while she was home, drunk in the next room. Radio turned up loud enough to muffle anything. Each time, Mama took the cash and stuffed it into the cookie jar on top of the fridge, as if blood money belonged in a place meant for sweet things. I became quiet, mechanical. I learned how to disappear without leaving the room, learned to bite down on my wrist to keep from screaming. I memorized the ceiling tiles in every room where it happened. I counted them to distract myself. 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of the men were older than my grandfather would have been. Some were college-aged boys with cruel smiles, daring each other to go further. One night, I was forced to entertain 2 men at once. Mama told me if I cried or resisted, they wouldn't pay. And if they didn't pay, we'd be out on the street. I was 13. At school, I wore long sleeves no matter the weather. I stopped talking to anyone. Teachers marked me withdrawn, troubled, but no one called child services. I think they suspected something was wrong. But in small towns, people mind their business. I clung to routine waking at 6, folding my blanket just so, brushing my teeth for exactly 2 minutes because it was the only control I had. I wasn't living, I was enduring, and Mama, she got bolder. She started gambling more recklessly, believing I was her lucky charm. If she lost, she'd send me to make it right. If she won, she'd buy herself new shoes and a steak dinner, and I might get a leftover hamburger cold and wrapped in wax paper. She said once, "You owe me your life. Sandra, you don't know what I gave up to keep you." But the truth was, she gave me away, piece by piece. When I was 14, one of the men left something behind a gold chain. I picked it up from the motel nightstand and stared at it for a long time. It wasn't beautiful. It was cheap, fake gold, and the clasp was broken. But I kept it. I didn't know why. Maybe I just wanted proof that all of it had happened, that I wasn't imagining the horror, that I hadn't made it all up just to feel special, like I sometimes feared in the quietest parts of my mind. I wore that chain under my shirt like a scar. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this couldn't last forever. My body wouldn't hold up. My mind was already cracking. I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the girl staring back. She looked tired, hard, like someone twice my age. Then one night, something changed. Mama lost big $3,000 in a backroom poker game. That kind of money was serious, the kind of debt that couldn't be delayed. She came home shaking, pacing, muttering to herself like she used to. But this time, she didn't look scared. She looked resolved. I made arrangements. She said to me, not meeting my eyes. What kind of arrangements? She lit a cigarette and blew the smoke toward the ceiling. Man named Clayton. He runs a place outside Omaha. Private. You'll be staying there for a while. I felt my stomach drop. For how long? She shrugged. Until we're square. I backed away. No. She looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, her voice cracked, not from guilt, but frustration. Don't be stupid. You don't get to say no. You're the reason we're in this mess. You think I enjoy this? And that's when I snapped. No, Mama, you are this mess. You sold me. You let them hurt me. And now you're sending me away like I'm not even your daughter. She slapped me, hard. The sound rang through the kitchen like a gunshot. Don't you dare talk to me like that. You owe me everything. I stood there, cheek burning, tears blurring my vision, but I didn't cry, not out loud. That was the night I knew if I didn't run soon, I'd die, maybe not all at once, but slowly, quietly, until I was nothing but a body in someone else's bed, too numb to scream. So I began to plan. No more waiting, no more hoping Mama would change. Hope had betrayed me more than she ever had. I wasn't going to survive by hiding anymore. I was going to escape. I waited exactly 7 nights after Mama first mentioned Clayton. 7 long, breathless nights. During that time, she acted like nothing had happened, like she hadn't arranged to ship me off to some man's private compound like cargo. She even made pancakes one morning, humming an old Patsy Cline song like it was any other day. But her eyes never met mine, not once. That was how I knew the deal was done. She'd made peace with it. I was no longer her daughter. I was a debt she couldn't afford to carry anymore. The morning I ran, the wind off the Platte River was so cold it stung the skin. I'd hidden away $2.12, mostly coins stolen from under couch cushions, and Mama's purse when she was passed out drunk. It wasn't enough for a bus ticket out of Fremont, but I thought if I could make it to the truck stop on Highway 77, maybe someone would give me a ride. I wore 3 layers of clothes under my winter coat, slipped the chain I'd kept under my shirt, and tied my shoes so tight they left marks on my ankles. I didn't take a bag. I didn't want anything from that house but the breath in my lungs. At 3:10 a.m., I crept out through the back door. The screen creaked just once, soft, but sharp enough to make me freeze in place. No lights came on. I ran. The stars were still out. My breath clouded the air like smoke. I cut through yards, dodged barking dogs, and didn't stop until I saw the green glow of the Sinclair gas sign off the highway. My legs were aching, my fingers were numb, but my heart had hope for the first time in years. I waited in the shadows until a man came out of the diner, a trucker, judging by the patch on his jacket. I stepped out, heart pounding. "Mister," I said, trying to sound older, "do you have room in your truck? I need to get out of here." He looked at me, really looked and frowned. "Where's your family?" They're gone. It was a lie, but not really. He studied me, chewing on the corner of his lip, then shook his head. "Sorry, kid, can't help." And just like that, he was gone. I sat down on the cold pavement behind the station, tucking my knees into my coat, willing the sun to rise and take me somewhere new. I don't know how long I was out there before I heard tires on gravel. I looked up. It was Mama's car. Panic gripped my throat. I tried to run, but I was too cold, too slow. She got out, slamming the car door hard enough to make me flinch. "There you are," she said through clenched teeth. Her voice was low, deadly. "You ungrateful little thing." She grabbed me by the arm so hard I screamed. A man stepped out of the diner, but one look from her shut him up. "She's my daughter," she barked, dragging me toward the car, just having a teenage moment. No one stopped her. No one asked. No one helped. Back home, she locked the front door and pulled the curtains shut. Then she dragged me into the bathroom and turned on the faucet full blast so the neighbors wouldn't hear. And she beat me with a belt, a wooden spoon, her fists. She beat me until I couldn't stand, until my lips split, until I tasted copper and bile. "You think you're better than me," she spat. "You think the world's going to save you." I curled on the tile floor, arms over my head, and begged her to stop. I think she finally did not because she found mercy, but because she was tired. She left me there, bleeding, alone. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering if this would be the rest of my life, if I'd always be someone's shameful secret, someone's dirty transaction, if maybe I wasn't worth saving after all. But something inside me refused to die. The part of me that remembered sunlight through tree leaves, the smell of cinnamon rolls at school, the soft voice of my third-grade teacher, Mrs. Campbell, reading from Charlotte's Web. That part still believed there was more than this. So I made a new plan. I'd escape again, but this time I'd be smarter. I wouldn't ask strangers. I wouldn't trust anyone with soft smiles and empty promises. I'd wait, watch, and when the time was right, I'd run far enough that Mama would never find me again, even if it meant walking barefoot across state lines, even if it meant risking everything, because anything was better than being sold like nothing. 2 weeks after Mama beat me half unconscious, I returned to school, bruised and broken, but silent as ever. I had no choice. She couldn't afford to keep me home, not because she cared about my education, but because school hours meant she didn't have to find someone to watch me. And Lord knows, there was no one willing to babysit that ward girl for free. I pulled my sleeves down past my wrists, powdered my face the best I could, and walked into Fremont Middle School like a ghost. I kept my head low, hoping no one would notice the way I winced when I sat down, or how I flinched when anyone spoke too loud. But someone did notice. Mrs. Diane Campbell. She had been my third-grade teacher, warm, kind, with soft gray curls and cardigans that smelled like cinnamon, the kind of woman who looked every child in the eye, like they mattered. And for a short time, when I was 9, I believed she might be the only adult who saw me not as a problem to fix, but as a girl worth saving. She had since moved to an administrative role, but that day, she just so happened to walk past the cafeteria and stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me. Sandra, I froze. No one had said my name like that in years, like it belonged to a child, not a burden. I looked up slowly. Her eyes swept over my face, lingering on the yellowing bruise above my cheekbone and the way I hunched to hide my ribs. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. I tried to brush it off. I fell in the bathtub. She didn't believe me. I could see it in the way her expression hardened not in judgment, but in resolve. That afternoon, she asked me to come to her office. I obeyed, too tired to argue. She offered me a cup of tea, set it gently in front of me, and said nothing for a full minute. Then she asked the question no one ever had. "Is someone hurting you at home?" My throat tightened. My fingers clenched the warm paper cup. For a moment, I considered lying again, saying no, pretending like always. But then I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in a long, long time. Safety. So I nodded. Once, and the tears came so fast, I couldn't stop them. She came around the desk and wrapped her arms around me, holding me like a mother should. And for the first time since I was a little girl, I let myself be held. "I'm going to help you," she said softly. "You don't have to go through this alone anymore." By the next morning, Child Protective Services was at our house. Officer Carla Jenkins, a woman with a voice as calm as snowfall, stood beside a man named Mark Ellison, a social worker from Lincoln. They told Mama that there had been a report, that they were conducting a welfare check. Mama tried to act shocked, like she couldn't believe anyone would accuse her of mistreating her own child, but I saw it in her eyes. Panic. I stood in the corner, silent, watching her performance unravel as the questions grew sharper. She tried to say I was rebellious, that I'd run off before, that I was always making things up for attention. But this time, someone was finally listening. Officer Jenkins asked to speak to me alone. We sat on the porch steps. Her voice was low, careful. "Sandra, honey, you don't have to protect her. We need to know the truth so we can help you." I didn't say everything. Not yet. Not about the men. I wasn't ready. But I told her about the beatings, about the hunger, about being left alone for days at a time while Mama disappeared with strange men and poker chips. It was enough. Within an hour, I was in the back of a county car, driving away from the only home I'd ever known. I didn't look back. Mama didn't even try to stop me. She just stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes hard. It was like I was nothing to her. But for the first time, that didn't destroy me. It freed me. They placed me in a temporary group home in Lincoln that night. It was small, with too many kids and not enough beds, but it was warm, clean, and quiet. I curled up on the mattress and listened to the silence. No footsteps outside the door. No laughter turning to violence. No breath reeking of whiskey hovering over me in the dark. Just stillness. Safe stillness. The next day, Mrs. Campbell came to visit me. She brought me a soft blanket and a small journal with my name written on the inside cover. "For the parts of your story you're not ready to say out loud," she said. I hugged her tighter than I'd ever hugged anyone. "I'll be okay now," I whispered. And for the first time, I actually believed it. For the next few years, I focused on healing, or at least surviving in one piece. The foster system wasn't gentle, but it was safer than where I'd come from. I stayed with 2 families before landing with a woman named Carol Winters, a widow in her late 60s, who kept an herb garden and wore her grief like a second skin. She never asked me about my past. She just let me be. And in her quiet way, she gave me the space to start breathing again. By the time I was 17, I had earned my GED, started working part-time at the local library, and begun taking night classes at the community college. I stayed out of trouble, kept to myself, and tried not to think about Fremont, Nebraska. But the past has a way of chasing you down, especially when the people who hurt you still walk free. One night, while shelving books in the reference section, I stumbled across a newspaper from back home. The date didn't matter. It was the name that hit me like a gut punch. Victor Harlan. He was pictured in a grainy photo, shaking hands with the mayor at some Rotary Club event. The caption called him a respected businessman and longtime supporter of youth outreach. I stood there, frozen, bile rising in my throat. That man who had taken what wasn't his, who had laid hands on a child, was being honored as a pillar of the community. No, not anymore. Something cold and ancient rose in my chest. I'd spent years blaming myself, questioning my worth. But Victor Lorraine, every man who'd come to that house, they'd never paid. And I wasn't that helpless little girl anymore. So I began my quiet revenge. It started with Victor Harlan. I gathered every public document I could find on him: business filings, tax records, local court cases. I learned he donated to local charities, volunteered at church functions, even coached a youth baseball team. He thought he was untouchable. Until he started receiving anonymous letters. Each one detailed a part of what he had done to me, descriptions only he and I could know. I made sure they arrived at his office, his mailbox, even his wife's book club. The final letter included a photograph of the old motel room, one I'd gone back and snapped myself with the words, "I remember everything." He resigned from the Rotary Club the next week. Rumors swirled. His wife left town. His business quietly collapsed over the next year. He never got arrested, but he lost the life he built on the bones of girls like me. That was enough. Next was Clayton Briggs, the man Mama once tried to send me to. I never made it to his compound, but I knew he'd hurt other girls. I found 3 women like me who'd escaped, barely, and buried it deep, together. We filed a report to the state's attorney's office, this time with witnesses, details, and scars that lined up. Clayton got 10 years in prison. I sent him a postcard, just 4 words. You didn't break me. And then there was Lorraine Ward, my mother. Years had passed. I hadn't seen her since the day CPS pulled me out of that house. I'd heard she moved to a trailer park outside Hastings, still drinking, still chasing poker games she'd never win. For the longest time, I thought revenge meant confronting her screaming, asking why, making her look me in the eye and see what she'd done. But when I finally stood across from her, it didn't go the way I imagined. She looked old, worn out. Her skin hung loose, her eyes dull and washed out. You, she said when she opened the door. Her voice was bitter, cracked from years of whiskey. You've got nerve showing up here. I'm not here for your forgiveness, I replied. And I'm not here to forgive. She sneered. You think you're better than me now, just because you got out. No, I said, voice steady. I know I'm better, because I survived you. I pulled an envelope from my coat pocket and placed it on her counter. Inside was a typed letter, every name, every date, everything she had ever done. I had made 3 copies, one for her, one for the local sheriff, and one for a nonprofit that helped abuse survivors file civil cases. I'm not hiding anymore, I told her, and neither are you. She stared at the envelope like it might explode. As I turned to leave, she said, I did what I had to. I paused in the doorway. No, Mama, I said softly, you did what you wanted to. And I walked away. I never saw her again. She died a few years later. Cirrhosis. Alone. No obituary. No funeral. And I felt nothing. No relief. No grief. Just quiet. Not silence, like the terrified hush I grew up in, but peace, the kind that comes when you've looked evil in the face and refused to let it define you. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was reclaiming my story, one truth at a time. After that day, at Lorraine's trailer, it felt like a rope had finally been cut from around my chest. I didn't realize how tightly it had been wrapped until I could finally breathe without fear. No more looking over my shoulder. No more pretending I was fine. I was free, but freedom, I found, wasn't just the absence of pain. It was the presence of purpose. At 25, I moved to Lincoln and started working full-time at a shelter for abused girls, the kind of place I wished had existed when I was 11. I started off doing laundry, sweeping floors, bringing in hot meals, whatever needed doing. But slowly, I earned trust, responsibility, and most importantly, the girls' stories. I never told them mine, not at first. I just listened. One of them, a 14-year-old named Monica, looked at me one evening and whispered, "How are you so calm? Don't you hate them?" The ones who did it, I paused. Then I said, I used to, until I realized hate gives them space in your head. And they already took too much. That was the first time I felt like I was helping in a real, lasting way. I eventually earned my degree in social work. Nights were long, and sometimes the past would sneak up on me in dreams, but I didn't let it stop me. Every exam I passed, every girl I helped, felt like a stone laid in the foundation of a life I had built with my own hands. Around 35, I met someone. His name was Daniel Harper, a quiet man with kind eyes and a laugh that felt like sunshine. He volunteered at the shelter, fixing broken shelves and leaky faucets. We started having coffee after his shifts, then walks, then Sunday dinners. One night, he asked me about the scar on my shoulder. I told him part of the truth. He didn't ask for more. He just took my hand and held it. We got married in a courthouse on a rainy Tuesday. It wasn't fancy. No white dress, no flowers. But it was the first time I had ever stood in front of another person and believed I was worthy of love, a real love, the kind that didn't come with conditions. A year later, we had Emily, and when I held her in my arms for the first time, I made a promise that the pain would end with me, that she would grow up safe, seen, cherished, and she did, now. Emily has a daughter of her own, Sophie, my granddaughter, who asks too many questions and eats strawberries by the handful. She doesn't know what I've lived through, not yet. One day, I'll tell her, when she's old enough to understand without losing the brightness in her eyes. But for now, I just sit in the rocking chair on the porch of our little farmhouse outside Fremont and thank God for the life I never thought I'd have. I still wear that gold chain sometimes, the cheap one the man left behind all those years ago, not because I'm proud of what happened, but because I survived it. And every time I fasten it around my neck, I remind myself that I was never just a victim. I was a girl who fought through hell and still found a way to love, to build, to live. In my 40s, with Emily growing into a strong, beautiful teenager, I decided it was time to take everything I had survived and turn it into something bigger than me. Not just counseling, not just listening, but building. So I did. With Daniel's help and a modest grant from the state, I opened a small nonprofit in Lincoln called the Hearth House, a safe haven for young girls who'd been abused, trafficked, or abandoned. We started with only 4 beds and 1 bathroom, but it didn't take long before every bed was full, every corner of the old farmhouse echoing with the tentative sounds of healing. I decorated each room with warm quilts, handmade by volunteers. We stocked the kitchen with comfort food and the living room with books and soft lights. But what mattered most wasn't what we put in the house. It was what we left out. No locks on bedroom doors, no yelling, no judgment, just safety and truth. I held weekly circles with the girls' group talks where they could speak or stay silent, cry or curse, whatever they needed. I never forced anyone to share their story, but when I did, I watched their eyes change, the disbelief, the recognition. You, they'd say, but you seem okay. I'm not okay. I'd answer gently, I'm healing, and that's different. Over the years, the Hearth House grew. We partnered with therapists, doctors, school counselors. We added legal aid services for girls trying to press charges or escape guardians who failed them. We helped dozens of girls find new homes, graduate, find jobs, rebuild. Some came back later as volunteers. One, a fierce young woman named Rachel, became a lawyer specializing in child advocacy. Another, sweet, quiet Jules, opened her own halfway house in Omaha. I never told them how proud I was with just words. I told them by being there, at graduations, court hearings, weddings, births. I sat in the front row like the mother I had once needed, and all the while, Emily stood beside me. She knew what I'd been through by then, not all the details, But enough. She used to cry when she was younger, furious that someone could hurt her mama like that. "I wish I could go back in time and protect you," she said once. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "You already did. Honey, every day you love me, you heal me. Now, in my 70s, I've begun to step back. The Hearth House is run by younger hands now, but I still visit every week. I still sit on the porch with the new girls, still drink weak coffee in the kitchen, and listen as they inch their way toward their truth. I don't push. I just remind them, you're not what happened to you. You're what you do next. That's what I've built. Not just a shelter, but a legacy of reclamation. A place where broken things aren't discarded but mended, where stories like mine aren't hidden but honored. And in doing so, I've healed in ways I never imagined, not because the past disappeared, but because I stopped running from it and started planning something new in its place. Last week, I turned 74. Emily surprised me with a small party at the farmhouse. Nothing fancy, just family, a few old friends, and some of the women who'd once been girls at the Hearth House. They brought homemade pies, flowers, and warm hugs that said more than words ever could. Later that night, when everyone had gone and the dishes were done, I sat out on the porch with Sophie asleep in my lap. The stars above Fremont were soft and familiar. The wind hummed gently through the cornfields, and for the first time in my life, I felt full, not just content, not just grateful, whole. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who slept in corners, who flinched at every loud voice, who thought the only way to survive was to disappear. She wouldn't recognize the woman I am now. And maybe that's the most beautiful part. Because no matter how deep the damage, no matter how broken we feel, we are never beyond repair. I never got an apology from my mother. The men who hurt me never stood trial. But I stopped waiting for justice to come from the outside. I learned to build it with my own two hands. Every time I told my story, every time I listened to another, every time I chose love instead of bitterness, hope instead of silence. That was justice. That was healing. And if there's anything I want you, whoever you are reading this or hearing my voice, to know, it's this: your past does not get to decide your future. You do, no matter what was taken from you. No matter how long you've been carrying the weight, you are allowed to rewrite your story. And you are worthy of a life that doesn't just look peaceful, but feels it. Maybe you're someone who's been through pain that no one sees. Maybe you've kept quiet because you thought your truth would ruin everything. But let me tell you something. I've learned the hard way. Speaking your truth doesn't ruin your life. It saves it. So speak. Even if your voice shakes, even if your story isn't tied up with a neat bow, even if you're still healing, especially then, because someone out there needs to know they're not alone. And if you've made it this far, thank you for listening to mine. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, tell me where you're from or who you're holding in your heart tonight. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, real, raw, and full of the resilience that lives in all of us, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We tell these stories not to dwell on pain, but to celebrate survival. To shine a light where others once tried to keep us in the dark, and to remind each other, especially in the quiet hours, that we are never truly alone. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. Sandra Ward, Fremont, Nebraska, 74 years old, survivor, grandmother, warrior,